What up, y'all? Mrs. U Nation, aka Savage Armor Jones Giraffe, coming at you with another episode of the Mega Colony Trap House podcast. Alright, so we got a little special one for you. As you read the title, we're going to be doing deck spotlights, but we're going to be doing deck spotlight versus because we got 3 rounds of doing a lot of other stuff. I mean, for about 6 units, 3 rounds going against each other, seeing which one is better. Now, here's how I'm going to be doing the the deck spotlights. There's 4 particular categories. One being the pros, one being the cons, one being the best support card, and the last one being is it worth using. So, that's basically the format I'm going to be doing. But because this is a versus, we're basically going to be adding a 5th column where which one is the better one at the end of the second one. So, what are the contestants for today? They're pretty simple. The first round is G version Ghidorah versus V version Ghidorah. I should say V series. Round 2 is Sticky Bolas versus Stamping Red. For those who don't know what Stamping Red is, Stamping Red is a card that is supposed to be one of the promos that we're supposed to be getting, but we don't know when we're going to get those promos per se. And it is kind of sort of support for a cradle marker mechanic that has a almost similar effect to Sticky Bolas, which is the reason why we're doing this. And the final round is going to be Machining Stag Beetle versus Machining Spark Hercules. I mean, oh, no, wrong one. I'm fucking up. Spark Hercules versus Machining Black Saturn. Why did I say Stag Beetle? I will never know. Although he is going to come up later in this video, so look out for that. Again, keep in mind that all of these are premium format based. All of these cards are going to be judged by their performance in premium format. This is mainly because I have G Ghidorah in here, but still, it's still pretty interesting. Like my thing, here's the thing: if it works very good in premium format, it obviously going to work very good in V series. Not all of my reviews are going to be based solely around premium format, but when the time comes when it needs to, I'm most definitely going to be basing it off a premium format. So with that being said, because there's a lot of cards to talk about, let's get this started. So round 1. G Series Ghidorah versus V Series Ghidorah. Let's get it on. Starting out with G Series Ghidorah, the pros and the cons of G Series Ghidorah. The pros: it has the best field control, grade 3 wise. It has damage zone control, and it is the best Mega Colony control game in premium. Like, if you're trying to make like a good Mega Colony control, there's nothing that can beat G Series Ghidorah right then and there. However, let's look at the cons. The damage control is absent if GB2 is inactive. It's an 11k Vanguard only skill. It doesn't generate markers, and it has a very bad matchup against Messiah. So, let's break down everything in the pros. First off, the best field control game, grade 3 wise. Here's the reason why I'm, putting this up in the pedestal. Here's the reason why. Her ability allows you to prevent your opponent from calling into one particular column, which is actually pretty strong, especially if you're not playing against an XL clan. Even if you're playing against an XL clan, you're still limiting your opponent's abilities to play certain cards in certain spots. This was definitely a lot good like back in the G era, because nobody had to deal with all them extra markers that XL clans could make. But still, this is still a pretty good card even for today's standard and premium format. And honestly, when you combine this with Empress Ghidorah, oh my god, you got a whole new thing to worry about. So you're not telling me that I'm not just preventing my opponent from calling stuff into this particular column, but they also can only call stuff from their hand. It's all like that changes a lot of stuff because now they can't use G Guardians. They can't they can't be like Pale Moon and call stuff from the soul. They can't be like Grand Blue and call stuff from the drop zone. And they can't be like Gold Paladins and call stuff from the deck. Is all and they can't be like Angel Feathers and call stuff from the damage zone. No, no, fam. Everything has to come from the hand. And this is all of not mentioning that any card that's currently on your opponent's side of the field is instantly stunned. That shit goes together like bread and butter, my guy. So yeah, that's why I said it has the best field control, grade 3 wise. Even though a majority of it does have to come from a tag team of the Empress Ghidorah, it's still there. Then there's damage zone control. It's all like her GB2 is pretty interesting because at the beginning of your turn, you get the Soul Blast one to choose a card face up on your, or your opponent chooses a card face up in their damage zone, and they have to flip it face down, and you choose a card from your damage zone face down and flip it face up. That works in so many ways. For one, that disrupts no seal because you already know a lot of the older no seal card, I mean a lot of the newer no seal cards has to rely on no seal being face up in the damage zone, and even though it's not a huge disrupt, it disrupts no seal enough in order for them to force to play around your playstyle. Then you also have the fact that if you're going against, like, let's say Cockerel for a prime example, they only have one face up card in the damage zone and you flip it face down, you just got rid of the what is it, the Denial Griffin problem. I don't know why the fuck I said duh so many times. I feel so I feel so dumb right now. But anyway, you basically have a way to get through Denial Griffin if it so happens that you don't go into Emperor's Ghidorah. Because I know, like, Emperor's Ghidorah is a very good stall game, but let's be real, you have to eventually end the game sometime, and this is like the next best bet. Because let's be real, a lot of the things are counterblast based, so you can kind of sort of get away with a few stuff here and there. Especially if you're using Parpello, but that's besides the point. Last but not least, for the pros, the best megacolony control game in premium. There's no other grade 3 in premium format that has a better control game than Ghidorah. I would say the closest will be G Series Intimidating Mutant Darkface. And that's because his GB2 skill allows him to force your opponent to rest their rear guards if something gets, placed on the field, which is actually pretty good. But let's be real, a lot of stuff is now Soul Blast based, so it's kind of hard keeping up with a decent soul to actually, it's hard to keep a resourceful soul when all of the other cards that's going to help you win is also Soul Blast base, and we'll get to those cards in a minute. But yeah, I feel like that if it wasn't for that, it would be amazing. It would be god tier. But G Ghidorah is manageable. G Ghidorah first skill allows you to counter blast, not soul blast. So I mean, overall, you can't really go wrong with that, like, at the end of the day. Then there's the cons, where the damage control is absent if GB2 isn't active. That's obvious. Seeing that there's hardly any other card outside of Venom Stinger that allows you to control the damage zone somewhat. Even though I don't think I can't necessarily count him because he doesn't is he isn't placed on the rear guard circle, so I can't necessarily really count him per se. So you have to choose either him or Ghidorah. Is one or the other type situation. So I can't necessarily count them. So if I don't count them, then yeah, there's no other card in Mega Colony currently, unless one of the Giraffe cards will do it, that actually controls the damage zone. Then there's the fact there's an 11k Vanguard. Here's the thing. This was pretty obvious. A lot of Vanguards now are either 12k or 13k. You're going to be minusing both offensive wise and defensive wise, staying as an 11k Vanguard. It's kind of like how back in the day, during the around the time when the G era first started, you didn't really see any units that used 10k Vanguards because everybody was 11k, and defensive wise it didn't necessarily help your decision that well. Especially even if you go a little bit farther back into the OG era Vanguard, where you started seeing those grade threes that if you had their other counterpart in the soul, it gains plus 2k, so it became a permanent 13k. Like, that definitely didn't help either. So it even goes as far back as the OG era Vanguard that this whole situation happened. Then there's the fact that there's no marker. Okay, I was solely debating on whether or not to put this card in here because technically G Series Ghidorah can make markers, and here's the reason why. There is a card called Area Stiller. It was one of our promos that came out earlier this year, and it has the ability of Soul Blasting a grade 3 to get an imaginary gift protect marker, as long as if there's a marker of any kind on any fighter's circle or unit. So if they have imaginary gift markers, you get a protect marker. If there is a cradle marker on one of their units, you get a protect marker. If there is, and I know it's very rare, you're going against 7Cs, then they have like the treasure markers, you're getting a protect marker. Like, it's just no ands or buts about it. That's how it goes. So that's why I was like, it's not really a con, but because you have to use another card that is not that searchable in order for you to get the marker, I can still technically count this as a con. And then last but not least is the Messiah matchup. This is going to be interesting to explain. So, Messiah has a mechanic that came up later on in the second half of the G series that if they can superior call something, rather it's from the deck or rather it's from the hand. I forgot. I think there was one that did it from the deck and one that did it from the hand, where when they call the unit is instantly locked. Now here's the thing, a locked unit is not considered a unit whatsoever. That technically should be common knowledge, but that should be more of a refresher for some people. A lock card is not considered a unit at all. It's considered non-existent. That whole circle is also in a way considered non-existent. You also got to remember that when they call the card, the way the wording is done is the card gets called as a lock card. If it said, hey, you call the card and then you lock it, then Messiah wouldn't have a way around this. But because it says you call it as a lock card, it can get around Ghidorah's main skill that prevents your opponent from using one of their two of their circles in that one particular column. They can basically call something in that column and just and unlock it, and it basically has a cheat sheet, you know, what do they call that thing? Game Genie type way of getting through Ghidorah whatsoever. So This not only applies to Ghidorah, this also applies to Optirandus and everything else like that. So they have a way to get over Ghidorah's skill. They have a way to get over Empress Ghidorah's skill. So that, in my personal opinion, is a very bad matchup. And I would have never knew about this if it wasn't for me doing practice matches with the admin of the Chaos Breaker Dragon page. Um, but here's the thing: a lot of people, a lot of my Mega Colony brethrens, you shouldn't really trip over this. Why? Because if you play against Link Joker, 98% of the time, you are going to be playing against Chaos Breaker Dragon. You will not be playing against Messiah that often. Hell, you have a better chance playing against the leaders than you do against Messiah. That's how little Messiah is played in premium format. You have a better chance playing Messiah in V standard than play it in premium format. Like, let's just be real on that. So, what is the best support card for G Series Ghidorah? It's obviously, like I mentioned before, Empress Ghidorah. Her GB1, I mean, not her GB1, her Counterblast 1 skill and Empress Ghidorah's Counterblast 1 skill. With the cost of 2 Counterblasts, you can not only prevent your opponent from calling in a certain column, but you can also prevent your opponent from calling anywhere that is not the hand. Which that includes G Guardian, which is amazing in my honest opinion. It's a dumb skill, but it's amazing at the same time. So, is it worth using G Series Ghidorah? Yes. Why? Because it's one of the few G era grade 3s that is worth using. You can use this 11k Vanguard and not really minus compared to a lot of other G Series stride break strides, or whatever you want to call it, grade 3s that exist in the game. Now, on to the V Series Ghidorah. Let's look at her pros and cons. Her pros is that she is a multi-attack enabler, she has the best grade 3 utility, and she makes cradle markers. She has the cradle marker mechanic in general. Her cons is effects are useless through the second half of the match. It is only worth playing for the marker in the 12k plus the name, and is not compatible with strides. Now, let me explain all of this one by one. In the pros, a multi-attack enabler. You've seen how everything's started changing towards the mid of 2020, where everything was basically, if you didn't attack more than 4 times, you weren't going to do anything. Like, I think like halfway through 2020, 3 attacks just does not cut it anymore. You have to do a minimum of 4 attacks in order for your deck to be viable whatsoever. There was never really any deck that did 3 attacks and was actually very threatful. No. Everything has to do a minimum of 4 attacks. And this version of Ghidorah gives you that particular ability. It gives you the ability to do more than 3 attacks and actually get away with it. You can do a total of 5 attacks, which is actually pretty good because I wasn't expecting Bushiroad to throw Mega Colony players a bone in order to do 5 attacks. But yeah, we can do 5 attacks maximum. 4 attacks would be the minimum. Basically because we have not only one card, which is Hell Demise, but we also have Interlude Scissors that allows you to restand a unit. So you're able to get those 5 attacks in. So she's basically very good for that. Bad grade 3, it has very good grade 3 utility. Um, let's be real. There's hardly any grade threes that does not go with V Series Gordora. Like, let's be real on that. Like, I remember, like, Gordora when she first came out, she had this weakness of going against decks like, let's say, um, like Grand Blue. It was a bad matchup for Grand Blue because Grand Blue would never leave any rear guards on the field for you to put, cradle markers on it. And the cradle marker mechanic basically goes like, if it only functions as well as long as you're able to put cradle markers onto the field. Seeing that there's no way to put cradle markers on your opponent's turn, everything has to happen during your turn. It makes it a lot harder going against decks like Grand Blue that can just shit out a field in their turn and then bounce everything back out off the field, at the end of their turn and the beginning of your turn. Like, that's just retarded in my personal opinion. So what I did was I put Gunning Colio in the deck. So if I ever to happen to go against something like, let's say, um, if I was to go against, like, let's say Pale Moon now for a prime example, where they basically just put everything back into the deck, Gunning Colio is there because, oh, I can force them to play to dish the top card of their deck and then also triple drive check and all this other good stuff that he can do. But then it doesn't stop there. There's also Venom Stinger that can work with Ghidorah. There's Interlude Scissors that can work. Hildemize, obviously. Intimidate Immune Dark Face can. There's hardly any grade 3s that Ghidorah does not work with. This is including Vanguard only grade 3s. Which is why, like, whenever you see Ghidorah deck is always playing a huge amount of grade 3s in their deck compared to everybody else, because they have that much utility with them. They have practically as much grade 3 utility as Dimension Police. I'm gonna just be real with you on that. Then there's the Cradle Marker mechanic. The Cradle Marker mechanic is definitely a lot stronger than the Stun mechanic, because the Stun mechanic, there was ways to get around it very easily, whereas the Cradle Marker mechanic, it basically forces people to think outside the box in order to get through it. Like, obviously, if they're playing something like, let's say, Bermuda Triangle or Nubatama, where they're able to bounce back the unit that got hit with the Cradle Marker, so the megacolony player does not get to search, then obviously that's going to be like the obvious thing for them to do. But at least you force them to waste materials and waste resources in order to get a simple problem and a simple roadblock, just so they can continue playing the game. Which, when you think about it, is technically the whole point of Control Megacolony is, oh yeah, you want to get to point A to point B, right? Us Megacolony players are going to make you go through point C, point D, point E, point F, point LGBTQRSTUV. We're going to make you go through so many routes just to play the game regularly. And even if we lose, at least, we made you work for that shit. At least. So that's why I said that the Cradle Marker mechanic is a very good pro to V-Series Ghidorah. But then there's also the cons. The effects are useless through the second half of the thing. Like, let's be real. Ghidorah, V-Series Ghidorah does not have a rear guard skill, which basically means that this card was literally meant to just be on the Vanguard circle. But then you also have the fact that megacolony does not have a stride that allows you to use the hard card skill. Not like how Royal Paladin and Shadow Paladin has it, where they're able to use the hard card skill and get away with it. Once you stride, you have to use a stride skill, and that becomes basically useless with V-Series Ghidorah because you can't necessarily do any of those skills whatsoever. So unless if you get to grade 3 first, compared to unless you get to grade 3 first, while your opponent's still at grade 2, that will be the only time you'll be able to use Gridora's skill. Outside of that, everything else is pure strides. Now, here's the thing, there's also the scenario to where you can't stride. Then, that's when you're able to use Gridora's skills. Let's be real on that. Then the second one was it's only worth playing for the marker, the 12k beat stick, and the name. That's actually pretty true because, like I mentioned, you can't use any of your abilities. So what do you have left? You have the fact that you're able to gain a protect marker, but like I mentioned earlier, you still have area stealer that can make markers on their own as well. It's just that you don't have to go through a you don't have to go through a hurdle in order to do so. Then it's the fact that it's a 12k, which kind of sort of plays over G Series Ghidorah's skill. And then of course the name, because there are only certain cards that can work if you have a Vanguard with Dark Face in their name. So that's also where that comes from. So the last one, not compatible with strides. So far, there's no strides that is compatible with the cradle marker mechanic. There's no strides that um distributes cradle markers or anything else like that. So you can't necessarily do anything with that. And, I don't know, man. Can't use you could still use what is it, Empress Ghidorah. You can still use her. You can still use Overwhelm. You can still use Tyrannus. You can still use Zoa, but like you don't get any extra effects. Whereas compared to G Series Ghidorah, once you stride, you're able to lock. You're able to prevent your opponent from calling to a certain column, which is something to at least do. So, what is the best support card for V Series Ghidorah? V Series Intimidate Immune Darkface, and let me explain why. Because Ghidorah is a Ghidorah is a Vanguard only skill, you're not able to distribute cradle markers while you're in stride. However, Intimidate Immune Darkface can work on both the Vanguard and the Rearguard circle and not only distribute cradle markers, but is able to also on command destroy cradle marker units with cradle markers on them when it attacks. So that's not only it. So not only you get the full effects of the cradle marker mechanics, but you also have a way to distribute cradle markers outside of using V Series Ghidorah. So, is it worth playing V Series Ghidorah in premium format? No. The cons outweigh the pros. Pretty simple. However, there is one thing that V Series Ghidorah has over G Series Ghidorah. It's when you cannot stride. If you cannot stride whatsoever, V Series Ghidorah is just going to be an 11k beat stick. If you cannot stride whatsoever, then you're able to play with V Series Ghidorah's skills, which is actually pretty good. But outside of that, our obvious winner is going to be G Series Ghidorah. Alright, round 2. Sticky Bolus versus Stamping Red. So, to remind everybody what Sticky Bolus does, on place on the Vanguard and Rearguard circle, with a cost of a counterblast 1, you're able to search out for, look at the top 6 cards and gain a dark face, up to 2 dark faces with different names and add it to your hand. The second one is when it attacks, you Soul Blast 1, and it gains 6k for each cradle marker your opponent has. If When she attacks, the attack is 20k or higher, you draw a card, which is actually a very good effect. I remember when this card first came out, I literally screamed out, hey, put this in any Mega Colony deck that you want to, regardless if you're playing Cradle or not, because all you have to do is hit um, the 20k milestone, and you get to draw a free card, which is actually pretty good. So let's look at the pros and let's look at the cons for Sticky Bolus. The pros are it searches out for two different dark faces. The second one is it draws and it gains power. And the third one is it doesn't have to be super reliant on Kratos in order to gain the draw. Then the cons are Soul Blast cost. It fights with interlude scissors for Soul Blast control. It relies on being boosted outside of Cradle decks, and its effect is completely useless if you're not playing any type of Dark Face in your deck whatsoever. So let's go over these one by one. The first off is searching for two Dark Faces. Now here's the thing. I know there's going to be times where you want to keep Intimidate Immune Dark Face into your deck, so you can call it out with Empress Gridor skill later. But this is still actually a pretty good effect. You look at 6 cards, you get to keep all of your non-Dark Face grade 3s in the deck because you're not going to be able to choose any of them. So you can keep stuff like Heldemise in the deck and all that. But then at the same time, you also have the ability to get like Gridora when you want to, and you're able to get Intimidating Immune Dark Face when you want to, and even Alakides. As long as the thing has Dark Face in their name, which I'm gonna be real with you, I do eventually see a time where we're going to have a grade 2 and a grade 1 Dark Face card. Like I feel like when Bushiroad does the clan selection next year, I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna call it right now. It's either going to be machining or it's going to be more Dark Face support. And I feel like that I'm going more towards the Dark Face support than I am going towards the machining support, but that's just me. Um so searching out for two Dark Faces is pretty good. It draws and it gains power. It gains power for each Cradle marker on the field, and it draws as long as her power is 20k or higher. It doesn't matter if she gets boosted or not. Her power just has to be 20k or higher. That's good enough for me in my book. Like, let's be real on that. There's no other further explanation. Then, of course, it doesn't have to be super reliant on Kratos. Again, that's what makes Sticky Bolus very good. It's just a simple fact that, hey, you don't have to really have Cradle markers in order to get to the draw. They're just there to help you get to the draw, and it makes it a lot easier so you can solo her. But let's be real, if you play your cards right, you don't have to necessarily play a Cradle marker. Like, think about this for a second. You basically have Heldemise and you have interlude scissors that allows you to restand. If you have the Soul Blast to actually pay for everything, you should be able to get 2 draws off a Sticky Bolus attacking twice. That's actually a pretty good trade-off, I'm not gonna lie. But what about the cons? The Soul Blast cost is basically a huge con as well when you think about it. Where was I? Oh yeah. The cons, the Soul Blast cost. The reason why this is a huge issue is basically because of interlude scissors, which also brings me to my second point. It fights with interlude scissors for Soul Blast costs. Like, here's the thing. You don't necessarily gain that much soul in Mega Colony. Like, I'm gonna be real with you on that. Like, um the soul management is very hard for Mega Colony because there's not that many cards that put stuff into the soul without minusing, and there's a lot of cards that can soul blast whatsoever. So when you have a card like Sticky Bolus where you're able to soul blast a card and then you have a card like Interlude Scissors. I mean, Soul Blast to draw, and then you have a card like Interlude Scissors that you Soul Blast to re-stand a unit and it gains plus 10k. I mean, that's definitely saying something. And I know like you can use something like Helldemize and whatnot, but let's be real, you can call Interlude Scissors from the drop zone and make them that useful. So there's technically really not that much of an excuse at the end of the day. But yeah, the Soul Blast is a huge issue because there's not that many ways to gain Soul for one without going through extreme measures. And you basically have to pull your Soul Blast management specifically for Sticky Bolus and Interlude Scissors. And then last but not least, um it relies on being boosted outside of the Cradle decks. This one is not, like I said, it's not that much of a huge issue, but when there comes a time where you have to solely when you have to solely base when you have limited resources, I should say, like when you're mid to late game, you have limited resources. This does play a huge factor because sometimes you're going to be all like, well, I can attack though, but the attack is not going to be that great. Like, let's say you don't have anything to boost Sticky Bolus unless you get like some type of like trigger and whatnot, and your opponent doesn't damage trigger themselves, then she kind of sort of becomes useless after a while. So there's that. But then there's also like the last thing I said, which was it has a useless first effect. This only applies if you're playing her in a deck that isn't Dark Face. Like, if you're playing her in a deck that isn't Dark Face, you're solely using her for skill 2. You're solely using her for a skill 2, you're not using her for a skill 1. And I kind of feel like that's a little bit of a waste. It's not that huge of an issue though, but it is kind of sort of a waste that you're using the second half of the card for a skill, but you're not utilizing the first skill. Like I kind of feel like in a way that's a waste though, but let me know what you guys think because I know like I think differently compared to a lot of other players, but that's just me. Next up is what is the best support card for this particular one? This is weird, but hear me out. Darkface Alakides. Here's the reason why. If you're looking at V standard for a prime example, the only two Darkface targets you have is you have regular Ghidorah, and then you also have Intimidating Darkface. But if you're playing premium format, you also have a reason to play Darkface Alakides because he can get searched by either her effect or he can get searched by Ghidorah's effect. Empress Ghidorah's effect. So there's two different ways that you can search out for him, and despite that he's just going to be there for a beat stick and he could kind of sort of play a little bit of control, it's still better than nothing. At the end of the day, it's still better than nothing. So that's why I said that this is the best support card. Because you're able to have a third search target in between all your dark faces, but that's just me. Then is it worth playing the card? All I gotta say is outside of Cradle Marker decks, you're gonna have a less fun time playing with it, but inside of a Cradle deck, most definitely yes. I feel like that this is kind of sort of worth using at the end of the day. Like I said, you can't necessarily pass on a free draw, despite that you're actually going hand to hand with Interlude Scissors. Alright, next up is Stamping Red. Stamping Red. So, what does her effect actually do? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Vulgar Mutant Stamping Red has the ability when it's placed on the Vanguard Circle or the Rearguard Circle, you counterblast one and choose one of your opponent's rear guards without any cradle markers and put a cradle marker on it. If you did not choose anybody, you draw one card. Then it has a second ability where it gains a plus 6k as long as your opponent has a rear guard with a cradle marker on it. Alright, so I have a lot of mixed feelings about this card, but before I get to that, let's get to the pros and the cons. The pros is it gains cradles and plays around an empty field. The second one is its draw power, and the third one is its power gain. Not as much as Sticky Bolus, kind of sort of similar, but unlike Sticky Bolus where it doesn't have to be super rely on cradles, this one kind of sort of does. And then you have the cons where it's an on place ability. You can't have both the cradle marker and the draw power, and you cannot play without cradles. So let's go through all these one by one. The fact that it gains cradle markers just by counterblasting one, and it can play around an empty field. So it can gain a cradle marker. It can also play around an empty field because, like I said before, you can choose rather or not to give somebody a marker. And like that thing I mentioned before, when it came to going against Pale Moon or going against Grand Blue, where they can just shit out a field and then you don't necessarily have to put nothing else out. I mean, at the end of the day, since they don't have a field to choose, you might as well just get the draw power at the end of the day. Then of course, it gives your opponent cradles. I feel like, in my personal opinion, if this card would have came out around the time Ghidorah V Series Ghidorah came out, this card would actually work a lot more wonders than people think. But I don't know. When this card comes out, I don't necessarily know if people will actually where people actually still be playing this card regardless. But that's just me. You also have the fact that it has a power gain and a draw gain. I mean, it has draw power and it has power gain. So it has continuous skill of gaining 6k as long as your opponent has a cradle marker, compared to Sticky Bolus where it gains 6k plus for each cradle marker your opponent has, but it's not stagnant. And despite that you have to get more, you only get more if you're able to, if your opponent has multiple cradle markers on the field. Remember, if you're to attack with just Sticky Bullets alone, in order to get the 20k, to hit the 20k threshold, you have to have, your opponent has to have a minimum of 2 cradle markers on their side of the field in order to hit that threshold, because that's when she becomes 21. Wait, that kind of sort of sounds bad wording wise, but you know what I mean. Then of course you have the cons. I'm gonna be real with you, I hate on place abilities. I'm gonna be real with you on that. I know, like, everybody has a different thing about on place abilities, but in my personal opinion, I don't necessarily like on place abilities. I necessarily don't like it because it feels very limited when your unit feels very unit. What? Your unit feels very unit. What the fuck? Your unit feels very useless. Just by having an on play skill, which is weird. But but man, it has an on place ability, so once its ability is done, it's just a 9k beat stick. Sometimes because of its second ability, which I feel like is the only reason why this card is worth playing, is because it gains a plus 6k. So even after the turn that this card is still on the field, you at least have a 15k, you know, beat stick, at least, as long as your opponent has a cradle marker. So that's kind of worth using. Plus, it gives you a better reason to sacrifice it with V Series Ghidorah, but that's just me. Then of course you can't have both the cradle and the draw. So unlike even though Sticky Bolus doesn't place cradle markers on the field, yeah, even though Sticky Bolus doesn't place cradle markers on the field, while this one does, at least you still have the draw power with Sticky Bolus, regardless if there's cradle markers or not. Whereas this one, if you choose to give a cradle marker to one of your opponent's units, you do not get the draw. If you get the draw, you do not have the ability to give a cradle marker to your opponent. So it's an either or. And even though, like, here's the thing. I feel like the draw is not really worth it at the end of the day. And the reason why I say that is because what will be the point of playing an on place unit on the field while at the same time having the it's like, okay, what is the point of playing an on place ability on the field where it just becomes a beat stick later and all you're using it for is to counterblast one draw? Now here's the thing. I know this is technically a somewhat tournament strategy because people did that with Berserk Dragon. A lot of people were playing Berserk Dragon because yeah, you're counterblasting one and you're soul blasting one, but you're also getting a draw just in case your opponent doesn't have anything on the field, so his effect isn't 100% useless. And I feel like that's kind of sort of understandable in a way. Like, you don't necessarily have to soul blast and counterblast with this skill right here, though, but like, maybe counterblast one draw should be enough. Maybe you're missing a particular card and you use that draw power and you get the card that you need in order to win the game. So I can't necessarily fault it too much though, but like I said, I have an issue with on place ability, which I'll probably do like something a video on it sometime soon. Then of course, you can't play without cradle markers. If there's no cradle markers on your opponent's side of the field, it's just a vanilla 9k B stick, which does not cut it mid to late game. It just really doesn't. So that's why I feel like it's a huge con. So what else is next? The best support card for it. High Class Moth. Let me explain. Once you use his ability, it's completely useless. Like I said, I have an issue with on place abilities. High Class Moth is able to put any normal unit from the drop zone back into the deck, and it also gets to unflip something. Here's my thing. Let's say you were just using her to get the draw power, and then you call something else over it. I don't know, like maybe Clear Breeze or something like that. I don't know. No, not Clear Breeze. Let's not use that for a prime example. Maybe you call like Intimidate Immune Dark Face over it. Like, let's say that for a prime example. Now, Stamping Red is in the damage zone. I'm not damage zone, drop zone. And now you have High Class Moth to put her back in the deck. Now, even though she's not going to be the most searchable unit, you at least have a way to use her skill at a later time in the game because it went back to the deck. So that's why I said that High Class Moth is actually her best support card when you think about it that way. And is it worth it? No. And yes. The draw power and getting the cradle marker is kind of sort of worth it. It does have a permanent power gain while your opponent has a cradle marker, but let's be real, unless if your premium format deck is heavily cradle marker based, there's literally no point in using this card. Now if this was V series on the other hand, oh yeah, I would probably say in some cases she would be better than Sticky Bolus. But you also got to remember that Sticky Bolus has an almost semi-unlimited way of drawing cards. Like, think about this for a second. Sticky Bolt is all like, if you have enough soul and one counterblast, you can basically gain twice as much hand with two Sticky Boluses on the field compared to one stamp would be compared to two stamping reds. Let me explain why. Let's say you have on both your rear guard circles, you have sticky bullets on both sides. So, and let's say you're able to use V Series Ghidorah's first skills, because this is not stride turn yet. And then you also have, well, actually, no, it don't even have to be in the drop zone. So, you attack with the first sticky bolus, you draw a card. You attack with the second sticky bolus, you'll draw a card. You'll attack with Ghidorah, sacrifice one of the sticky bolus, and then you'll call Interlude Scissors, or you'll call Hail Demise. Basically, you are now able to restand one of the other sticky boluses, and you're able to use sticky bolus skill again, which will also net you another card. Now remember, if you're going by this by grade 3 only, Ghidorah gets a twin drive, and then you get an extra 3 cards. All of that is not considering if you hit a draw trigger or not. This is all considering you do not hit a draw trigger. You get all of that. You basically double your hand just to get everything, or at least you net one. Um, you net 1 to 3 cards off of all of that. Yes, you probably don't have any cards left in the soul, but you do net a lot of cards in hand. And like I said, this is like 5 cards minimum, without counting draw triggers. So obviously, Sticky Bolus is the winner to this one. Sadly, I know I'm just kidding. I like both cards. Unfortunately, this video is pretty much going to be over an hour. At this particular, it's almost over an hour, and I would kind of say that doing this last one will be going over an hour, which I don't plan on doing. So I'm gonna just end it right here. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully I'm doing this all correctly. Sorry for all the mishaps and everything else like that. But with that being said, my name is Mrs. Zoo Nation, aka Salvage Armadillo Giraffe. See everybody next week, and this is the Main Colony Trap House Podcast.